Welcome to another Overwatch League team preview. This time we'll be looking at the London Spitfire, and joining me is Korean Overwatch scene expert Wolf, caster for Apex Season 3 and Season 4, and hopefully for many more seasons of Korean Overwatch in the future. So, London Spitfire is a 12-man roster, and they are composed 50% of the Apex Season 4 champions Royal Road team GC Busan, and they are partially composed in the other 50% of Kongdoo Panthera players who were a long-time contender for a title in Korean Overwatch. And then on top of that, they have added some players from some other teams to round out that roster. So this is a weird team because it's basically like two separate teams, two separate 6-man rosters that have been fused into one 12-man roster.
Yeah, and there's a lot to talk about with this team, but the circumstances surrounding this team's formation are really cool. Just in general, as obviously you mentioned Panthera, but they were very briefly known as Cloud9 Kongdoo
Yes.
for half of Season 4, where they were eliminated in top 4. Then, and that was known, that was going to be London, right? It was kind of announced it's going to be the London team. It's a very strong team. And a lot of people are saying, well, I guess they didn't get Lunatic High, but they got the next best thing. London's got this solid roster then. And then they weren't the next best thing because Busan won, and then they were like, aha, we'll get that one too. And then they got two teams.
Exactly. So it was interesting because as soon as in that season, you would have said, okay, well, Lunatic High and Kongdoo Cloud9 are probably the top two teams. Like one of these teams is going to win Season 4. And then all of a sudden, GC Busan comes out of nowhere. They beat Lunatic High twice. They end up going into the finals. They end up winning in 7 games. Super close series. Obviously, Runaway, another great team that is unfortunately not in the Overwatch League right now, but will have to be continuing to play in Korea for the time being.
Yeah, they're seeded into contenders for Korea too, so we'll be seeing more of them for sure.
Absolutely. A very, very good team. That team, Runaway, in and of itself, is probably better than many of the teams in the Overwatch League. Almost certainly, in fact, but we will not get to see them in OWL, at least for the first season. So London comes in, and it's hard to talk about this team in terms of style because we've got two different styles going on. We have two 6-man rosters. So let's start with GC Busan and talk about this team's style coming in, because a lot of it was based off of their adaptation and their coaching, because they didn't start off in Apex Season 4 looking like they were going to win, right? They had a rocky group stage followed by catching completely on fire in the playoffs.
Yeah. They came as a team that, I've said this many times, the impression from the Korean side of things and the Western side of things in a group stage was a very mediocre team, it was a forgettable team. They qualified, but it still feels like an Apex Challengers team. It feels like maybe they could get relegated, if we go into Season 5, like maybe they won't make it through. Get through group stages after a struggle, and then became on fire in the playoffs. And most people point that to their coach, who's no longer the coach of the team and has moved into Seoul Dynasty, of course, but Hokuri, who coached them to that victory by identifying weaknesses mostly of enemy teams, exploiting those, and allowing their main DPS player Profit to basically carry the games. Certainly what he did. But the coaching staff, I think, was a huge part of why they elevated. And unfortunately for the London squad, that's of course combined with Kongdoo Panthera, they don't have that coach anymore. So how they'll fare without him is, it's up in the air.
Yeah, and throughout all of this, Bishop, who was the coach of Cloud9 for quite a while now, who used to be himself a Kongdoo professional player back in Apex Season 1, is still the head coach of this team. So we'll get to him in a little bit, but that's sort of the part that has remained in Cloud9. When Cloud9 had Western rosters, Bishop was there, and then now they have an all-Korean 12-man roster, and Bishop remains overseeing this entire project right now, instead of Hokuri, who, as you said, went to Seoul. So the other side of things, we do have the Cloud9 Kongdoo roster. 4 players come from that roster that we saw in Apex. Two players, Waka Waka and Void, did not come with this team and were so this roster is being supplemented by Fury and Nuss as a result. So Kongdoo Panthera was many people saw them for their like crazy outfits. They were a versatile and aggressive team. They often used more unorthodox strategies, particularly because of Rascal's ability to play a wide variety of DPS heroes, and was sort of the first breakout Sombra player that we saw in Overwatch history, closely after that hero's release. And this was a team that was primarily defined by their DPS, by having crazy good DPS players, especially Birdring, who is on the table for best DPS Overwatch player, period.
Yeah, I mean, this team always felt like, if you look at Lunatic High as like the elite team that almost feels like they're perfect, I feel like Panthera was the team that almost earned the right to be called, the best team in Korea. They almost earned it, and it felt like Panthera was an evolution. Like we had both Panthera teams starting off in season one, or sorry, both Kongdoo teams starting off in season one, and then Uncia and Panthera kind of developed alongside each other. And actually, Uncia was the stronger team initially. There were a lot of roster swaps, and then Panthera became the stronger team in three. Then going into season four, it became Cloud9 Kongdoo, but just for the purposes of just explaining this, Panthera was a little bit weaker in that moment compared to the rest of the teams in Apex, but was still considered to be the big favorite to go to the finals along with Lunatic High. But this team, I feel like, really evolved over time, and it was always about the DPS players. And that's why the season three finals of Apex was so cool, because it was about the support players on Lunatic High versus the DPS players on Panthera. And that was what everyone was saying about that finals, which was why it was so interesting conceptually. But yeah, I think Rascal and Birdring are the defining players on this roster. Void himself was a huge boon for the team as well. Like his diva play, I think, was what held the team together and was one of the reasons why they were able to do so well in that finals. The lack of him on this roster is going to definitely hurt. It's definitely going to be felt, no doubt. But this is a team. Remember, guys, that basically went toe to toe with Lunatic High when no one else could, and I think that's kind of the way that you have to remember it.
Yeah, they lost in a very close 4-3 full 7-game set in season 3 finals. So they placed second in season 3, they placed third in season 4. So in the London Spitfire, in one season, in season 4, there is both all of, or not all, but most of the players from the third place team and all of the players from the first place team. So when we looked at them in the preseason, they were sort of had already cut the teams in half. Now, worth noting that Bedosin, who is a support player for Kongdoo, did not make it to the US in time, so he did miss the preseason. So there was some mixing of rosters that was happening. But we mostly saw GC Busan playing as 6 members, with the exception of them moving a support player over because they needed it onto the other roster. But the big story that we come into of the preseason is, how the hell does this all-star super roster lose to the London Gladiators, including the full GC Busan roster looking absolutely terrible on some of the maps that they were playing, despite being the reigning Apex Season 4 champion and arguably the top team in the entire world?
So I missed that match live, and I woke up, saw the results, and it was one of those moments where you're like, what happened? Watched the VOD, and it was definitely a messy series, and I think that GC Busan, well, let's call them London Spitfire in this case, even though it was mostly the Busan roster, really struggled with some lack of coaching. The fact that they're probably scrimming a lot of weird, like, you have to imagine with this 12-person roster, it's basically a super team. It's the most super of super teams. You have to imagine they're probably scrimming the craziest stuff that could ever be imagined. It's like, all right, like, in this scrim, we might, Birdring, can you play like Mercy for a second? Because we need to try this guy in the DPS slot. And you have 12 people trying to figure out all their schedules and who's going to scrim what and who's going to play where. Maybe they have two kind of scrim squads that they're running. Maybe the plan for this team is to have two teams basically where they play like some days this team and some days the other team. instead of just doing what most smaller rosters would do is, you know, sub in a flex
They might
or
also
do
they're probably also like scrimming each other, like
yeah,
themselves, you know?
exactly. So like it creates it creates a weird situation for sure within the team. And I think that's probably a lot of weird stuff happening in scrims where they haven't really figured out or hadn't at the time figured out what they were doing exactly as to why this happened. And they also don't have their main coach that the GC Busan part of things, of course, don't have their main coach that they used throughout season 4 where they had their victory. So I think those things will be ironed out. But you can almost think of this team as a team that has sister teams. So sister teams, of course, for those who don't know, in Korea for a long time, there were a lot of teams that had two teams under the same banner. MVP and Heroes of the Storm, for example, might be one that people know. MVP Black, MVP
I
Miracle.
mean, it happened
There
in
was a time,
Overwatch too. I mean, look at like
yeah, Kongdoo Panthera and Kongdoo Insia.
yeah, 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 exactly. So you can
Um,
have sort of in-house scrims where you're trying to run weird strategies that 100% are not going to be leaked by players to other to other teams. You can give zero information if you want.
Yeah. And I think that might be the plan of having these two rosters to almost have them as sister teams within the team, just without that name. And we'll see if that works. But oftentimes, though, when you have that kind of situation, it can create what people called in Heroes for a long time this sort of inbred meta where you've decided that with these scrims that you haven't scrimmed with anyone else, you're kind of keeping it to this 12-man roster. You learn how you think the meta is based on only playing with this other team, but you kind of learn sometimes wrong things from that. Um, who knows? But I don't know exactly how this is going to play out. But I think that the reason why they played so poorly in preseason is because all these things have to be figured out. You suddenly put 12 Koreans in America. I know you guys used to be enemies. Now you're on the same team. Figure it out. That's quite a tall order to do in such a short period of time.
Yes, and for what it's worth, from talking to the Cloud9 coaches or the London Spitfire coaches myself, I can say that the plan was coming into the preseason to sort of keep them separate as rosters. You'll have the GC Busan and then the mostly Kongdoo slash also other players from teams that we'll get to in a minute roster, and it was the mixed Kongdoo roster that ended up doing better, and they were played entirely as the mixed Kongdoo roster on the second day, and they 4-0'd San Francisco really convincingly. So we didn't get to see GC Busan past when they played a few maps against the LA Gladiators. So I don't know if there was an issue there, if they needed more time, if they were under practiced because of the move. Many, many things could have been happening with that roster. So let's start by talking about the individual players, though. And that's going to be, when we think about London, their biggest strength is that they probably have the best DPS core in the entire league. Like, if you look at this and you're like, do they have the strongest tanks? They got some really strong tanks, sure. But are they the best? Maybe not. They've got some great supports. Are they the best? Maybe not. Are their DPS the best? I think it would be hard to argue that they don't have the best DPS players, right?
Yeah. I mean, they have Rascal and Birdring, okay, and they have Hureg, who is a fantastic player, very underrated, I think,
I agree, he
because
is underrated.
like
Let's talk about Hureg. Let's start with Hureg, the underrated
let's talk
player.
about Hureg because I know probably people have learned this from other videos I've done and in my casting, but I really think I always try to put the long range hit scan players into the limelight. And Hureg is, in my opinion, his best hero is Soldier 76. They don't get put in the limelight because I think for a lot of people, the idea of just like watching a soldier shoot from high ground and killing people that don't even know exactly where he is somewhat uninteresting. And they want to see the tracer that puts the pulse bomb in the middle of a team fight. But to me, like that's the mechanical skill required to do the things that tracer players can do is fun to watch, and it's very, very skilled. It's very high level. Hureg's skills, I think, are a little bit different. He finds the place where he gets a good line of sight. He's so good at finding good lines of sight in weird places you wouldn't expect. And he'll be the guy who somehow gets on the second floor of Hanamura on point B, and you're like, how did Hureg get up there? Where was he this whole time? How is he able to just suddenly be up there uncontested, killing everyone with attack visor he popped? And it's because he takes weird approaches to how he wants to get to where he's going. And his positioning is so important to getting those kills. And his accuracy is fantastic, but I mean that's kind of a given if you're an Apex Championship level player, like you're just going to have good accuracy. I feel like people don't understand that aiming well is like something that anyone could obtain eventually, but the game sense aspects of where to move and where to position, I think, are sometimes a lot more difficult
And also
to get to like the
require
highest scaling.
better coordination with your team. Like everybody has to be on
Exactly.
board. Hureg also
Yeah.
was the Genji player for this team. So it's like not only was he doing this other stuff, but he was also for most of the season the Genji up
Yeah.
until the finals.
Yeah. Until suddenly Prophet played Genji a lot, which
Was weird.
he it was weird and like
Also
I feel
amazing.
like it was weird and amazing. I don't think he played necessarily as well as Hoxel. That's my opinion, but he had the higher KD. But anyway, um, like he's a really good Genji player. I think we'll definitely see a lot of Genji out of him. Also, Doomfist. He's very good at Doomfist. Again, one of those things we talk about. Doomfist is kind of being out of the meta, not necessarily going to be even seen this season. We'll see what happens, but his Doomfist is very good as well.
He also played Tracer in
And
the finals because
yeah,
he and Prophet switched from Tracer to Genji for I don't even know why. I mean, certainly Prophet
it was.
was amazing, but it was weird to see when we'll talk about this with Prophet. Like Prophet is in another player who we could have a discussion about. Is this guy with Bird Ring or Fleta like the best DPS player in the world right now? But Prophet was a player who spent most of his time playing Tracer, and Hurrig was a player who spent when they were playing dive comps most of his time playing Genji, and then in the finals a few maps in, they switch and then they win the finals. Like, and Prophet hadn't played Genji all season, right?
Yeah, so not even one time. So it was really weird, but shows the flexibility of this team in terms of its DPSs. Obviously, Prophet, if we're going to shift gears and talk about him,
Let's do that.
his Tracer play was absolutely fantastic all season long. Really good pulse bomb usage. But to me, the standout about Prophet was his accuracy. And when you watch Prophet, I said he moved like water when I was casting him, but like it really felt that way. He doesn't when you watch his first person view, he doesn't shoot left and right and like find target and jump to it. It feels like he always knows where everyone is all the time. It almost feels like he's tracking someone through the wall before they even appear. His crosshairs is always on the heads of his opponents. And he very calmly gets headshots, recalls, and leaves. Um, and just like his overall uh, accuracy and quick reaction times, I think were what made him one of the highest KD players of the season, and why he's so strong on the Tracer. Just simply because he didn't have to try to make the flashy plays. In fact, sometimes he just simply wouldn't because it was too risky, and he would just play safe, get the headshots, and get the kills, mostly through left click more than pulse bombs. Sure, he has had a few amazing pulse bombs, like a few triple kills here and there. Every Tracer has, but I think that was a standout for me. It's just his calm approach to Tracer, his safe approach to Tracer, and his I'm going to do the most efficient damage possible all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to get the kill myself. I'm going to help someone else get the kill, and I'm never going to die while I'm doing it. If I can't, like, Prophet's playstyle feels like if I can't make this happen with like a less than 10% chance I'm going to die, I'm probably not going to try it because if I die, then everything could go wrong. So I'm just going to play safe, shoot at them in the head where I can calmly and slowly and do a lot of damage output that way.
And as a result, a lot of people were saying by the time that GC Busan won, what this guy's playing at another level. He is such a fantastic DPS player. So like Fleta, another player that could be in contention for MVP of the season, absolutely. And he has a teammate who also might be in contention for MVP of the season, which is Birdring. Birdring is a player with a lot more history than Prophet, but many players, professional players I know, were always praising Bird Ring, his positioning. He was a player that he does unexpected things, a lot like how you describe Hureg at his positioning on the high ground. Birdring will pop out at weird flanks and just like destroy an entire enemy team with attack visor. And he's very deliberate in his positioning and his play. He doesn't mind taking a long time to set up if he knows he's going to have that like super effective punch right afterwards.
Yeah, Birdring is a player that I feel like has really good crisis management as well. He's the kind of player where someone, say for example, the enemy tracer gets a pulse bomb with 2 kills, like supports are dead, and it looks like this team fight is over. Like there's no way, Birdring's team, in this case London, you were playing it, can recover from this fight. They probably have to back off and reset. And Birdring in that moment will do all the right moves, like say on the soldier, to get 2 kills to equalize things while surviving using his biotic field to live. And then suddenly, even though they didn't have supports in that fight, like because he's playing soldier, for example, and heal himself, like he can manage that crisis and at least make it kind of an even trade so that the fight could perhaps continue, or he's going to get the most ult charge possible out of that moment. And I feel like his crisis management is very good in those situations. And often you'll see, Birdring turn a fight after a fight is lost. And you'll see clips of that, or you'll see it in a tournament where it's like, oh, this fight's over. Oh, wait, no, Birdring got 3 kills. And so it's okay. Like,
He fixed the problem.
yeah.
So his partner on Kongdoo Panthera for a long time is Rascal. And Rascal is a wild card. He's a joker of a player. He's always been weird in that I alluded to this earlier, but he was one of the first players to pick up Sombra. He was playing it in a DPS role and having amazing performances. We also saw some of his Mei play in the preseason when he basically just like won Horizon Lunar Colony by being super annoying on the second point. So he can play so many weird niche picks at an extremely high level, and he's the player like Libero who I think is going to on New York, who will add a lot of strategic depth to this roster because you can use him in very strange situations and in very strange ways that people are not going to be able to prepare for.
Thing is, I feel like he has a slightly narrower hero pool than Libero, but
True,
by that same margin, he's much better at those heroes than
that's true.
like he's more focused on the Sombra or the Farah, for
Yeah,
example,
Farah, of course.
and his Farah is really good. I just my first time casting Rascal was in promotions, and for Apex Season 2, I think it was. I don't remember which season it was exactly, but the first time I cast him, I remember a soldier player, like not a famous one, just whoever was playing that promotions tournament, tack visored him while he was from behind. So Rascal was playing Farah, does not have a mercy on him at the time, is floating. This was on Ilios Lighthouse. He's firing at like the lighthouse. There's a soldier behind him with tack visors. And the second the first shots fire on him, he spins around like 180 degrees and rocket barrages the soldier and kills him and lives with like 20 health. And I remember in that moment I thought, this player is going places. Okay. And that's just the kind of player he is. Flashy plays on unusual heroes that aren't always standard in the meta. And I think like a prediction I could maybe have for Rascal this season is maybe a new hero comes out at some point, or a hero that's not in the meta as much will be played by Rascal, and he might reinvent how the hero is used in terms of DPS. Like if Rascal suddenly was like, okay, Zenyatta is a DPS actually, like he can heal a little bit, but like look what I can do with Zenyatta, like I'm a DPS. Like it would be Rascal who would like make people consider like, should we consider Zenyatta semi DPS? Like did you see what Rascal did with that? Like I'm being facetious here, but like that's the kind of player that he is. Absolutely.
So moving down, let's talk about some tanks. So Gesture, um, interestingly, is a former League of Legends player, but he only played in Japan uh, for
Yeah.
for some Japanese teams in the LJL. So we're not talking like by any means a top tier player when it comes to LoL, but when it comes to Overwatch, this guy was the MVP for me personally. I thought he was the MVP player of the season 4 finals. I think his Winston is he's probably the best Winston player in the world right now. Just absolutely crazy awareness and positioning, and constantly making massive plays with the Primal Rage.
Yeah. The Primal Rage plays that he made were really well timed, I think. Like sometimes Primal Rage feels like it's like a mini game where you try to hit it the last second where you're at the lowest possible health, so you get the maximum value out of getting the Primal Rage, and then using that to buy time or secure an objective, just the knockback of Winston swings while he's in Primal Rage. And the Jester's understanding of how to do that was really strong. His understanding of like the thing I talked to a lot of people about this going into the finals because I try to get opinions from Korean side of things. So I speak with a lot of people on the Korean side that actually look at what the Korean fans are saying, coaches are saying. So I talked with like Robin and Raleigh Jaffa, for example. I don't know if other people know Riley Jaffe is a writer, but I was like, what are people saying about Gesture? Because I have my opinion, and his opinion and the Korean fans' opinion kind of all aligned about his usage of the barrier. He always holds it as long as possible because a lot of Winston players would go in and just drop the barrier immediately, try to make a play off that. But Gesture would hold the barrier as long as possible so that he wanted to only use it when it was going to be impactful for sure. Even if it meant that when he didn't use it, he died that one time. He would rather die sometimes and maybe the play is ruined there because it wasn't a certain thing. Would rather die sometimes doing that than do that so that he could in those moments where he's certain the barrier is going to win them the objective or whatever. He wanted to hold it for that moment, and sometimes he died obviously because of that. But um, maybe they were able to make those clutch plays because he had the barrier on the point when everyone was in position. The barrier comes down and he got the point then. And maybe if he had used the barrier in another case, he lived and they get the point anyways, but he would always be so deliberate in his usage of the Winston bubbles and knowing how to survive without it to make sure they could place it at the right place was something a lot of the Korean analysts were talking about as well when I talked to them about that. So that's one thing I noticed about his Winston play, and he was definitely far and above considered to be the best Winston player at the end of Apex Season 4. And everyone was saying like Miro was old news, except the Lunatic High fans because they would never be
They would
persuaded. But
never
everyone
they would
else was
never
saying,
admit to that. Yeah, I agree though. At the time, like Jester's peak was really high. It's just a matter of whether he can sustain that going forward. But an exciting player for sure who comes over from some mild success in a different title. And his counterpart at the tank position is the old Kongdoo tank, Fisher, who's been there for a very long time now. Was initially started mostly as a Reinhardt player, but transitioned pretty well into Winston and some Orisa picks that we've seen. Uh, it's going to be hard, I think, to pick which of these guys you're going to field in any one game because both of them are super strong.
yeah, it's tough too because they have similar play styles. I think a lot of the time, Fisher's a little bit more aggressive, and he goes on what the Apex casters like to call solo queue missions sometimes, where he'll try to go get a pick. Sometimes when you see the Winston who's up on top of the I don't know what to call it, the roof, I guess, of like Volskaya, where he's kind of like glitched into the thing,
Yeah,
stuff like that. Like Fisher's so famous for that, right? And just being up there and kind of sliding
waiting to
around
drop
that.
down. Yeah,
Yeah. But like sometimes those like usually that's like the safe spot right on the roof. But sometimes Fisher will try to do something crazy like on point A of Volskaya, like behind, and he's like, I'll just go up here by myself and maybe I'll kill the soldier. And it doesn't always go well. Like he's definitely had these solo queue missions sometimes that haven't gone well. But I think when he is playing team and he's trying to I guess coordinate a little bit more with a traditional Winston style, I think is very good. I think it's funny because with Gesture and Fisher, I think most of the time on paper you'll use Gesture, but I think Fisher's experience as a player is one of the reasons why he might be used in other cases or might be used a lot in the beginning of the season. Because people were shocked and surprised when the GC Busan roster didn't do well in preseason, but people forget that literally that team had basically only played through challengers, which is an online tournament, and then played one season of a tournament after that. Just one, had a
and only
record
played
run.
only played super well for half of it, by the way, because the first
Yeah,
half was
only
shaky.
half of it. Yeah. So they had a sick run for like a few weeks, and then everyone hailed them as like this is the greatest team that's ever happened, forgetting that there are other teams that have been as good basically for multiple seasons over a year of time. And this team had this one streak, and winning one tournament through that streak does not make a legendary team. It makes a Royal Rotor team. How this team does in the future, I think, was what makes them legends, right? That's why Lunatic High is a team of legends because they've won multiple titles, they've had multiple top finishes, they've placed well in every tournament they've ever played in. So I think that experience that Fisher has from playing for so much longer, playing since season one, if I remember correctly, is really going to carry over. And I think that might be why sometimes, even though it's like, well, Gesture was way better in season four, that was a while ago now. And I think the experience that Fisher has might be one reason why he's played instead of Gesture,
One thing
especially for the first few weeks.
Yeah, one of the things that Jester does have going for him, though, is that he does have established synergy with Wu Hyal, who's the off tank player, whereas Fisher Void is not coming with this. So they have a
Yeah,
new off tank player, Fury, and he doesn't have synergy with either of these players, right? So Wu Hyal was a player, impressed me with some self destructs on Diva during his time with GC Busan. Certainly was not like when we think about GC Busan, you wouldn't say he's one of the best players on the team because we'd be talking about Jester, Prophet, Closer. These are all more of the like huge name players that really had a breakout season. But what are your thoughts on Wu Hyal?
I think he's really underrated as a diva player, and um, like Wu Yal's playstyle is really similar to the other diva player that was on the team that was kind of originally the main diva player, but then became the sub Ariel. Very much a kind of jack of all trades style of diva, like a diva player that you can't really say one way or the other. The style is he's very defensive or he's very aggressive. I think based on the comp they're running, like if they're running a heavy dive comp, his diva is very aggressive. If they're running like Hureg on hit scan on the Soldier 76, he's going to play a little bit more of a defensive style to make sure that Hureg can get to where he wants to be. I think he's really like we were talking about in the Soul video that Zumba is like not necessarily a top three diva. And I think that but he's still very good, right? I think Wu Hyal is like maybe one step below Zumba
Hmm.
in terms of diva. Like he's very, very good. He's fantastic. He's Overwatch League caliber, but he's not a standout diva. And how that affects this team is yet to be seen. But I think he's got a lot of pressure on him now because Void is not on the roster, and Void would have been the perfect fit given his history with the Panthera team. So there's a lot of pressure on this player. He's done well under pressure before in season 4. So I think it's one of those wait and see situations with this player. But I do think that he has a lot of potential, and he's a player that I think will kind of eventually meld into his own style instead of trying to play the jack of all trades diva where you can't really see any glaring weaknesses, but also not any glaring strengths. I think he'll form a style over this season.
And his competitor for that slot is Fury, who's another sort of strange pickup. He was a Korean player on Rhinos Gaming, but then he went over to Team Liquid. And I know a lot of Western players and coaches were really high on him. Liquid did well in Contender Season 0, but this is a player that would not have struck me as a major pickup to add to this Kongdoo roster. So I'm still like waiting to see. He reminds me a lot of Zephyr, who came from the old Cloud9 roster, like a player who was on a low tier Korean team who's then imported to the States in 2017, has a mediocre run, and then gets picked up by a huge team. So I'm still waiting to see what this guy can do.
When I cast him in when he was on Rhinos back in the promotions tournament I was casting him, he was also playing DPS. And so switching roles as well, it's like a little bit odd to me. I actually didn't see his games in Contender Season 0, so I don't know what role he was playing. Was he playing tank? Do you remember if he was playing tank then, or if he was playing
It was
DPS?
a while ago. I think he was playing tank, flex tank, but I don't recall specifically.
Yeah, it was a while ago, right? But when that pickup happened, I was like, well, he's probably he was a decent DPS player and probably got picked up for fairly cheap, and was sent to this roster. So I thought, okay, this makes sense that he would go there, but I didn't really see his games there. So it's weird for me to imagine him based on what I've cast of him for him to be on the off tank. But yeah, it does feel like a Zephyr-esque pickup where maybe he was the best choice available, given that everyone was getting snatched up at the time. Like there was not a lot of free agents while this team was being formed, especially the latter part of the team. Like when GC Busan was coming in, that was like pretty last minute. So maybe he was the best choice at the time from tryouts and things like that and scrims. And maybe we're gonna see something, after he develops, where we're like, oh, okay, like that's why. Now I see why they picked him. But it's tough for me to really give this guy like even a thumbs up. I feel like he was always pretty okay. I don't want to say mediocre, but nothing special.
Well,
and he does not fill Void's shoes, like not even close. Like he will not.
And
He's not gonna. I don't think he can.
Yeah, we do have to ask like why Void wasn't picked up. It's really weird that such a talented player would not be. There must have been some Either
I think
Void didn't want to leave Korea, or that he may not have fit in with the rest of the team in terms of culture, like, or his attitude. I don't know what it was. I have no.
so. I mean, there's a lot of talk about about Void during the period right before the signing of Cloud9 Kongdoo when that partnership occurred, because there's a lot of drama regarding like some posts he made on Twitter and things like that. And you could read all about this. I'm not going to go too in detail about this, but if you search it, you can find it. And I think maybe that might be
Hmm.
related. Some sort of frustrations with the team, or perhaps different directions they wanted to go, because the other members that were embroiled in this controversy that are still on the team as we speak made like really hefty apologies, and were able to come back to grace with the team. I don't know about Void's situation, but it sounds like he might have had a different viewpoint than the team on that kind of controversy that occurred. Um, so maybe that's why I didn't make it. But it's really sad to me because I personally have always, I've
I think he's
interacted
a
with
great
Void many
player.
times. Like he's a great player and he's also like a pretty nice guy. But like I'm just really sad he's not on the roster, because I feel like if he is, this team is like, I feel like at least 15% better than it is going to be now without him.
I,
Just it's going to take so long to rebuild the synergy that Void had with these players. With Wu Yao, he's not experienced, right? He's a very new player. Fury experienced, but like perhaps his talent isn't developed yet, and the lack of Void. It's ironic his name is Void, because Void's being
he's
gone here
leaving.
will leave quite a void. He's leaving a void, quite
Absolutely.
literally.
So yeah, there are definitely some shoes to fill on in the off tank role. So let's switch to the supports. I know you love closer. So
Yeah.
you have like a giant crush on closer. So why do you have a giant crush on closer?
Well, so I had heard this from a lot of people, and so I went to investigate and ask. And I said this on my cast of the finals, but it is said that Closer has been tested and trained specifically to know ult charges at any given moment, and he was able to guess from like, at any moment if they paused the game and said how much ult percentage does Soldier 76 on the other team have right now? You want to be able to tell based on how much damage the hero had done in the fight, or how much he healed himself within like 2 or 3% most of the time. So like, yeah, I think he's at like 57 right now. Maybe he was at 60, 61, but he's like very close. That's pretty negligible differences there in his ults. So his understanding of where enemy ults are, because he's so, I guess you could say, almost spatially aware of everything that's
Great
happening
game
at any given
sense.
time. Yeah, he's got game sense. So he knows these things so well that he's able to identify, oftentimes, for example, we have transcendence, they don't have transcendence. If we fight right now, maybe he can pop transcendence at the end of the fight, maybe, but we can kill them before then. Things like that, especially for mirrored matchups. So if you know that, for example, your Winston has Primal Rage and theirs doesn't, you can focus him, kill him, and be very aggressive with your Winston, because if your Winston almost dies, you can Primal Rage and then kill. It's not about knowing they don't have it. It's about knowing, okay, he's at like 65%. There's no way he's going to get it in this fight. So we can kill them at this moment, because I know he didn't do enough damage here. So his ult charges got to be a little bit lower. Knowing the differences in mirror ult charges is something that Closer specializes in. From what I've heard from people who've scrimmed against him, scrimmed with him, and from the coach as well, that this is something that he's like kind of been trained to do. So he's very known for that in Korea, as what the Korean commentators talk about a lot as well. So I think when you have a player like this, he's not a standout Lucio player in terms of like, he's not like Toby. He's not going to have the moment where he kills the Genji that's killing the backline. He'll probably die in that moment. But what he brings to the table, I think, is something different.
The
And I
teamwork
think,
aspect, the
yeah,
calling, the shot
yeah.
calling aspect.
And I think that even as Lucio is not super meta right now, I think whatever hero he ends up playing as his main backup here, which could be the Mercy, could be the Zenyatta, probably the Mercy, is going to be, I think he'll still bring that same amount of knowledge to the table. Obviously, it's a little bit tougher when you're playing a hero where you have to be a little bit more focused on something specifically in front of you. Like if he's playing Zenyatta or if he's playing Mercy, it's a little bit tougher to kind of just ride around and like gain information like Lucio can, because you're not as mobile and you're focused on specifically one thing instead of just focusing on an area. But I still think that shot calling aspect and that understanding of ultimates is going to be a huge asset to this team. And I think he's one of the most important players on this roster. And I think that type of player is like almost one of the hardest to find, because you can almost make any player who trains hard enough good at mechanics. Like mechanics are impressive, and that's what, sometimes makes fans and what makes Twitch clips and stuff like that. But that can almost be made if enough time is spent to almost anyone, even an ordinary person with enough time, even if they're not talented, could become mechanically good. But to make the type of person, the type of mind and strategical kind of thinking that closer has, that is much more difficult to be taught. That's something that's a talent and a skill that I think is almost exclusive to him.
So his partner is Hagapun, who we know primarily as a Zen player. I think like Wu Hyal, probably one of the less notable players of GC Busan. Did you see anything that you particularly distinguished Hagapun's play?
I mean, I just thought he was really good at using transcendence overall, and like discording targets and things like that. Like he's just a standard Zenyatta otherwise. No real crazy standouts on the Ana. He had a few good sleep darts, but nothing flashy. I mean, he's a very solid
Yeah.
player. Like he's like, I guess he's kind of just another thing that like holds the bricks together. You know what I mean? He's like the glue that holds the team together in another way, but not a flashy player.
Yeah,
Not going to
definitely.
be the player that you think like, oh my god, this it's not a Jaehong, moment where you're going to see him kill a bunch of people with left clicks. Probably just not really gonna.
Right, and I think we can say the same of Nuss, who is previously the flex support for Meta Athena. Sure, we've seen a lot of his Ana play, but he's much more of a team player, a good sense of how to use ultimates, but he's not going to be the crazy sleep dart guy.
Yeah, I think there's actually something to talk about for a moment. I think that's really interesting is if you are the Jaehong guy who's trying to make those perfect sleep darts happen and you can hit those consistently, it makes you an amazing player. There actually is a trade-off to that, though. If you're trying to take these risky plays, like even if you can hit them as well as Jaehong has, sometimes you miss healing as a result. Sometimes
Sure.
you have that trade-off. And I think Nuss is one of those players that, especially on his Ana, he almost never takes the risk, so his healing output is incredibly high. But like you can't rely on Nuss to save you when like that Dragon Blade starts flying, whereas Jaehong will save you like at least half the time. It feels like. So that's the kind of comparison you could make to a star on a player like Jaehong, and then Nuss, who's like a very good player but nothing flashy.
Yeah, and it is interesting to me too that with Closer, who is the Lucio player, when they lost Waka Waka, who didn't come over with the rest of Kongdoo, and they kept Bedosin, who was the Kongdoo flex support. They added another flex support, so they actually have 3 flex supports on this roster. So Bedosin, another solid flex. So at least I think what's interesting to me is that it seemed like they knew they didn't really have like the upper tier flex support players. So they just tried to get they added one in the extra like that 12th man slot they had when they added Nuss. They say, okay, well, we're gonna get another one, and we'll see which one of these guys is gonna really show up.
And all the supports that are being played in the meta, or at least what we understand to be the meta, is things are changing between even preseason and what's going to happen. Overwatch League starts very soon. Um, what maybe they also were able to figure out too that in this upcoming meta, as Lucio kind of drops out, as I like to say, like Lucio almost feels like a role in itself in Korea. Like Lucio was like a position, and now that's not really the case. So maybe they just want to have a lot of players that can play all the supports. The main supports were once flex supports. Like Mercy was considered a flex support with your Lucio. Now, like that, you get Lucio, the Ana, the Zenyatta, and even the Moira, who doesn't really serve the same role as like a Lucio did. It's similar in a lot of ways, but not quite the same. Maybe like having a lot of flex supports means that they'll have players eventually that can suit these specific support heroes very well. So I think that's something to consider too. But yeah, one way or the other, they've got a lot of potential to grow with these secondary supports, and one of them should eventually bud to be the main one. And I guess we'll find out soon who that's going to be. My money is probably Bedosin, but I think that Nuss certainly could make a case for himself as well.
So now we come to the coaching staff, and we mentioned Bishop earlier, who was hired early on by Jack when they were on Cloud9 to coach a mostly Western roster at the time, who then did not coach the Kongdoo Cloud9 team, but who has been retained as the head coach of this new organization. So he's coming in as a former professional player from Kongdoo himself. He is fully bilingual in English and Korean, so unusual and like natively bilingual in both languages. He grew
Yeah,
up. He grew up in the States, so interesting to. And he's also older. He's 29 or 30 now, so he provides that rock as the head coach of the team. And they're bringing in one of the GC Busan coaches, who's Changgun, and they're bringing in Jay Feel, who is a former HOTS Heroes of the Storm
Yeah,
professional player, who I'm sure you casted in the past.
yeah, I
Um,
did.
and he actually was the one of the initial coaches on GC Busan when this roster was being made, then left GC Busan to coach at Kongdoo, and now is coaching both GC and Busan and Kongdoo together. So he's actually like the guy who's like the most familiar with all of these players.
Yeah, so Jay Feel, who used to be called Jung Feel, I guess he just shortened his name to make it perhaps easier for Westerners to say. Was a really good Heroes of the Storm player for like the beginning of Heroes of the Storm. Became like as he got older, because he's much older, than most Heroes players were. Like as he got older, he kind of fell off a bit, then went into coaching for Heroes for a while. Then when Overwatch came out, I heard he was coaching, and then ended up obviously on these two really powerhouse teams. And because he knows both squads really well, I think that he's going to be a great asset for this team. Um, and Bishop, I know there were a lot of people were not sure if Bishop was getting picked up or not. There's a lot of controversy about that. People were like, "Oh, I heard they didn't get him. Like that's really weird." But they definitely got him from the beginning. And Bishop is very well respected in Korea. I know a lot of Western fans, really like his coaching style, and maybe even some fans from when he was a player. But he's very well respected in Korea by everybody. Whenever his name gets brought up, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, Bishop is really smart. He's the guy I respect. He's older." Um,
He's
he
also
was,
he's also he's really patient
yeah,
and understanding. So he's not like a hot-headed coach at all. He's more like he feels whenever I talk to him, I almost feel like he's like my therapist or something, where he's he listens very well and he's very like gentle in his demeanor. Doesn't get angry, always tries to see multiple sides of the issue. So I think as an emotional leader for this team, he's probably going to be very good as well.
I think that's really important with a team that has notable hotheads or a little bit of aggressive personalities such as Birdring and Rascal. And I think that that kind of style will do well for these superstar players who are so well known in Korea, so many fans. I mean, you guys have seen the fangirls on the Apex Finals. You've heard the screams, okay? Like they're very famous, right? Like they have a lot of Western fans as well, but they're probably like, oh, there's probably a ton of Western fans for Birdring. You don't even know how many fans there are in Korea for these guys. To make the transition to America, there's definitely gonna be struggles. They're not now living with five other players, but living with seven other players basically, or like six additional players plus the five that they're living with. There's a 12-person roster, so 11 people to finally get the math right there. That the else they're living with and working with now and training with. So I think that kind of patient coach is gonna add a lot. His game knowledge, obviously, as a former pro, is insanely good too. And because he can communicate in English with other coaches for scrims, I think that's really valuable because he can, if they're scrimming with another team, they can discuss what they want to scrim, set it up exactly how, say they want to scrim Dallas or something. You talk to the Dallas coach in English, and well, I guess Dallas now has a Korean coach as well, but to talk to Dallas in English, right? This is just for example's sake. And be like, I want to run this specific comp. I want you to run this because I think it's the counter to what we're running. We want to try this. He could communicate with the other Western coaches and also be able to speak Korean. So the fact that he's bilingual in America, in a league that's happening in America, is very important. So I think Bishop's going to be a great tool to make this team, this chaos, this 12-man super team,
Yes.
do well.
So let's talk
Because
about the chaos of this team, because there are concerns that there's too many cooks in the kitchen with this team. Like they actually have too many good players. How are they going to resolve having all of this talent that's fighting for these starting positions? Are they going to be able to figure out a good synergy with this roster? Are they going to trade away some of these players once they figure out what that synergy is partway through the season and they sort of settle on a starting roster? Or are they just going to keep all these guys the whole time and try and make it work? Like there's like a million questions that you have about. There's a lot of ways that
yeah,
could go right, and there's also a lot of ways that this can go wrong.
I think I think the way that it goes right is you end up with like a main roster and a sub roster, you know, almost like the sister team idea I was talking about earlier. And then maybe you run certain, because you can sub all these players, right? I mean, you could try to run on certain days against certain teams the team you think is better against that team's play style. Because if you have so many overlapping roles, like we talked about how many off supports they have, like some players get frustrated not playing enough. It's gonna be motivation could go down, and we're talking about like the psychological aspects
Yeah.
only, but their play will perhaps deteriorate as well from not playing, over
Yeah.
an extended period of time. And you and I were talking about this on an episode we did with Thorin about how like this team might just have too many good players. Like while it's actually sad for the fans even because sometimes like maybe Rascal doesn't play for 3 weeks because he's a really good player, but he's being outperformed by all the other really good players that are on this team, so he just can't play. Or Birdwing's not playing because Profit's playing better right now, so we just never see him because they play the same role. There's definitely going to be moments like that. Will they sell or trade the players eventually? I think if they don't do the exact kind of like two team sort of thing that I was talking about, I think that they will definitely lose some of their players that want to, play more often and that are just being benched because they're
Yeah, they might
underperforming in scrims.
might request trades, but there's also the possibility that they maintain two distinct teams, and that some of the scary thing is that if both of these teams are so high quality and high caliber, they can split the map pool and sort of practice on each of them practice and get super
Exactly. Yeah.
specialized. And for enemy teams, like you don't know, they can sub all six players. Like how
Exactly.
do you even prepare for this? Like you have to prepare for two teams in the same match. Like so there's a lot of weird things that they can do that no other team could feasibly do outside of Philadelphia. But even then, they aren't going to have. London has all 12 of its players available now. Philadelphia
Yeah.
has to wait till halfway through the season to get 11 players from 10, and then they have to wait another stage. So it's only stage 4 in the playoffs, if they make it, that they'll have 12 players. So this is like a
Not
crazy.
only that, but this is literally two teams that
Yeah.
existed independently of each other already. It's not just like 12 players, it's like two 6-person
Well,
teams.
no,
basically.
it's like
With some
it's
exceptions.
like a 4-person team with a
A
couple
4
of
and a
new
6,
players. Yeah,
basically.
yeah. But it is daunting to say the least. So it's going to be interesting to see whether they try and mix the rosters, whether they keep the rosters independent of each other. Are they going to have maybe game type specialists? Like, is there like a particular 6 group that they use on control versus like this is their assault 6-man unit?
Or maybe they have a dive team that's better at dive, and then the other team
Yep.
they're playing against that match day is bad against dives. They want to play the dive squad,
Yeah,
for the entire 4-game series.
Yeah, this is definitely like you look at the depth on this roster, and it's just crazy. So I think that this is going to be London's success really depends on the coaching, like the
Yeah.
coaching and the decision making that's used about how to use all these various tools without stepping on people's egos, like you say, deflating their motivation by keeping them on the bench too long. This is like a really weird simultaneous like strategy/emotional juggling act that, if it goes well, could result in a London championship in season 1. And if it
Yeah.
goes badly, even if it goes badly, they're probably still going to do super well, but maybe not win.
Yeah. The sort of idea of like second string, third string kind of thing that you have, like that doesn't quite watch yet. This might be the first team that kind of puts us into like this sort of idea of like, okay, let's sub this guy out. He's like exhausted in the longer series, right? I mean, Overwatch and esports, we're not really there yet, but like maybe that sort of like mentality comes from this team. And it's really, I think it's going to be a question of like when people are casting this, when people are watching this, they're going to be wondering every map, like which version of London are we getting this time,
I just
And
feel bad for their opposing teams because they're going to be wondering it as well, and it's much more hard on them.
yeah, I think that's going to be the question. We've seen so many super teams over the years do well and some do poorly. Going back as far as StarCraft, League of Legends, Heroes of Storm, just games that I have experience with. Sometimes super teams are godlike, and you just feel like this isn't even fair. But honestly, more often than not, in my experience, super teams just defy expectations in the other direction.
Right.
You expect so much from them, but like they just can't pull out the chaos. There's too many egos, or there's too many problems, and like I'm I'm actually a little bit cautiously pessimistic about this team. And I think, as for the reasons you mentioned, especially in terms of preparing for how to deal with this team, it's a big challenge. But I think even though on paper, when you look at the roster, you think this is number 2 team over Excelsior, right? Like if you look at the 3 Korean teams, um, but I'm not sure. Like I'm a little bit pessimistic based on watching the preseason. I have a lot of time to grow. There's a lot of time to get the GC Busan players that don't really have that much experience, even though they're a championship team, get more LAN experience, get more experience now in a Western country with different fans. I think there's a lot of room to grow. But I think when we really see this team do well, when like the super roster really pops off and it's really impressive, and everyone goes, "Oh my god!" Like what everyone's expecting now. I think that moment comes towards the end of the season.
That's
At the
fair.
beginning of the season, though, like I think it's going to be they're going to lose matches. I think they will lose matches.
I
That
mean,
I
it's
think
already been
Polar
rocky in the
Excelsior will not lose.
preseason, so
Yeah,
yeah.
I think they'll
Okay.
lose more matches.
Yeah. All right. This has been our longest Overwatch League team preview, which I suppose we should expect. I mean, this is like the most complicated team to talk about with the most players, so it makes sense. But thank you very much for sharing all your insights with us, Wolf. We'll hopefully see you casting more Korean Overwatch in the future. And be sure to, of course, check out my channel for more of these Overwatch League team previews. Thanks.